The first step to this process is to doubt our own minds. The truth turns to bullshit in the human mind, just like food turns to excrement in the human body. Our minds work pretty much the same way our gastrointestinal systems work. A mind is developed to take good, nourishing truth, absorb what it can, and turn the rest to shit. Unfortunately, the mind doesn't expel its waste automatically like the body does. We have to do it voluntarily. According to Hugh Thomas, author of A History of the World, the greatest medical advance in history has been garbage collection. The greatest psychological advance in history is just around the corner, and it will also have to do with cleaning up. Cleaning up lies and coming out of the closet is getting more attention these days. Some days we will look back on these years of suffocation and bullshit in the same way we look back on all the years people lived in and died from their garbage. Lying. This book unfolds developmentally, beginning with an accounting of how a mind grows from nothing to what it is by the time it reaches adolescence. The central message of this book is that we human beings, in the course of growing up, get lost in our minds, and if we don't find our way out, our minds eventually kill us. We all have minds, and we all come by them naturally. In learning how to survive from birth to adulthood, we start out using our senses as a primary mode of orientation in the world, and we end up as minded beings using principles of orientation. We abstract from our senses and build our minds. After a while, we get so involved in mind development that we lose touch with our senses and get lost in our minds. Our minds are formed of interpretations about reality based on replicated experiences. After a baby experiences getting nursed repeatedly, it starts anticipating being nursed again based on hunger and its little memory, and it cries for more milk. When more milk comes quickly, a tiny little concept involving time has been born. The baby has an interpretation. If I cry, I'll get milk. That interpretation has a memory in it and an expectation for the future. As we grow, we learn to interpret our experience in order to survive. We eventually become capable of taking care of ourselves, but our survival techniques can and often do eventually kill us. What kills us is intense attachment. Intense attachment to our interpretations and failure to distinguish these interpretations from sensate reality. This process of learning to categorize experiences and then forgetting the distinction between categories and experience itself is what I call learning how to lie. Learning how to pretend, interpret, evaluate, and imagine is a natural process for every human being. It's fun. Most of us who learn most of the time in early childhood, in preschool, and in elementary school learn to elaborate on these abilities. In every culture of the world, as infants grow toward adulthood, this learning of pretense is going on. The long process of learning how to lie culminates in adolescence. Adolescents get lost in their imaginings about who they are. Erik Erikson says that the question being asked during adolescence is, who am I? And the answer eventually reached is either fragmentary, called role confusion, or unified, called ego identity. In order to mature beyond the role-playing or pretending stage, the question, who am I, must get answered in some unitary way. The numerous roles that kids try on for size have to become integrated into a consistent identity that remains even when new roles are adopted. This uniquely synthesized personality eventually has to predominate over role requirements, as demonstrated by role models, or by ideal role performance. There has to be a Jillness about the way that Jill plays the role of daughter, lover, waitress, that is there all the time she's talking to her mother, being with her lover, or waiting tables. This Jillness stands out regardless of whether mother, lover, or customers are in the environment, and regardless of how often she's seen the roles played on TV. The duration of this developmental stage, the stage of pretending and trying on roles to establish or invent who you are, depends on the culture in which you live. The more technological the culture, the longer that stage endures. Bushmen have 1 year, from 11 to 12 years of age, to form their identities. By the age of 12, they've chosen a vocation, gotten married, started making babies, and assumed adult roles. In our culture, adolescence lasts from age 11 or 12 to about 40. This extension of the time to choose vocational, sexual, and social identities in highly technological cultures is a mixed bag. Right now, the fastest growing death rate in our society is for people between the ages of 15 and 24. Suicides, drug overdoses, accidents, and murder head the list of causes. We get a longer time to invent who we are, but the job takes a greater toll. Even when people survive the years of adolescence, the great majority never get over the pretense of adolescence. Enormous suffering is caused by being lost in such pretense. Frequently, helping professionals recommend more pretending, or more conventional pretending, because they don't understand that the job of psychotherapy is to re-ground people in the world of experience. The stress that kills or cripples most of the population comes from people being too hard on themselves when they don't live up to their own imaginings about how other people think they should behave. We don't know who we are, and we try to guess who we ought to be in order to do the right thing and be happy. We get lost in the process and beat the hell out of ourselves before we even know we're hurt. It does no good whatsoever simply to change what we imagine others expect of us. We need to recover the ability to pay attention to something other than the whirlpool of questions and doubts about what is required or expected for acceptance. We have lost this ability to pay attention, to live outside the set of assumptions a mind is. And the only method of orientation left is given by the roles we've been trying on for size. Thus we run around in the world while running around in our minds, trying to live up to standards we imagine others are requiring of us, while we starve for the nourishment that comes from commonplace experience. We end up trying to eat the menu instead of the meal. Menus are nutritionally without value and taste like shit no matter what pretty pictures decorate their surface. Adolescents miss the security of childhood and can't stand the uncertainty of being between childhood and adulthood. Out of anxiety and an intolerance for ambiguity, they grasp onto roles or rigid standards to claim an identity so they can escape the interminable struggle over how to fit in. They become Christians, or Hare Krishnas, or gang members, or hippies, or marry a childhood sweetheart, just to have a place to stand. They adopt the standards and principles of these groups to live by. Standards or principles to live by are all equal in this way. They are abstractions of the mind, summations based on past experience, not experience itself. Adolescents of all ages become more passionately attached to standards the more insecure they feel. Strong attachment to principle only increases our rigidity, which further increases our feelings of insecurity. Such behavior doesn't guide us through our changing experiences. The world of experience is like a river. You're better off with a boat than with a post to hold on to while the water beats you to death in the floods. To grow beyond adolescence, people have to let go of, rather than tighten their grip on, the principles and standards with which they define themselves. The reemergence of this struggle, the struggle for identity that was put away by grasping onto an identity out of an intolerance of ambiguity, is the most valuable function of psychotherapy. It's for people who are frozen in role definitions. These people are reborn from their mental jail into the here and now. Such people learn to treat principles not as rules engraved in stone, but as less important rules of thumb to be validated or invalidated by new experience. Rules of thumb can be revised or rejected or created anew if the people who hold them make allowances to include new experience. Alan Watts's book, The Wisdom of Insecurity, is an elaboration of this point. People who are intensely attached to moral principles notice only the experiences that justify the rightness of the principles, and simply don't notice anything else. Fritz Perls, one of my teachers, recommended that people lose their minds and come to their senses. Unless people who have grown minds learn to lose their minds and come to their senses again, pay attention to gravity, their own bodies, the world of real objects and other beings out there, they remain locked in their own tightly held notions of how things are, and never notice any new experiences. Yogis, Buddhist monks, golf pros, a few psychotherapy clients, some musicians, and an odd assortment of others regain their ability to pay attention in spite of the minds they've developed. These people somehow progress beyond being trapped in and dominated by the mind stream to the exclusion of everything else. A mind is a terrible thing. Waste it. This book delineates the problems that result from not escaping your constantly interpreting, lying mind, of not growing beyond the developmental stage of learning how to lie. It gives examples of how withholding the truth from other people kills or gravely dampens the life of the withholder. Psychotherapy is one way of learning how to finish growing up, how to get to creativity from the intermediate developmental stage of adolescent lying and fantasizing. What I've developed is a treatment for the problem of being stuck in adolescence, a problem I believe is shared by more than 75% of the population of the modern technological world. The essential treatment method is a clear intention agreed upon between therapist and client together to tell the truth to each other and to everyone else the client knows personally in order to find our way out of the maze. This holds the great promise of bringing us into a more adult way of living, grounded in experience, less superstitious, less moralistic. Ironically, to mature fully, we must rediscover what it was we knew when we were less sophisticated. Once we've recentered ourselves in our experience, which is the position we inhabited as children, we can finally use our minds as instruments for creation rather than as defense systems for our image of who we are. Ultimately, we can unite the real world of experience in the here and now with the world we know about from memory and interpretation. The secret of this union is to release energy by living out loud rather than spending all of our energy trying to control ourselves and others through withholding. The secret, in other words, is telling the truth. Growth into the personal power of telling the truth is the key to life beyond adolescent moralism. Psychotherapy is one method of rescue from being choked to death by concepts which were learned for the sake of efficiency and to avoid unwanted experience. As I said, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The effectiveness of psychotherapy depends entirely on the client's commitment to telling the truth, and this applies to the client's behavior inside and outside the therapy room. There are many ancient systems of thought dealing with the stages of growth beyond lying and posing. Most historical, spiritual, religious, mythological teachings are based on the psychological growth of a few wise people who marked out a path for others to follow. In our age, the opportunity has come for all of us to learn the whole path. If we human beings are to be saved from ourselves individually as well as collectively, we have to learn more about the art and science of speaking the truth. None of us can do it without a lot of help from each other. Summary. My clients and I have been learning from each other that the primary requirement for getting beyond adolescence is telling the truth. This book deals with the whole problem of telling the truth, the difficulty in telling the truth, how it hurts one to not tell the truth, how we are all liars, how it works against our self-interest to lie. It is common for people to ruin their lives and kill themselves through withholding. It is normal for people to stop growing and to die from an accumulation of mild stress disorders over time. Being overweight, uptight, a heavy smoker, a heavy drinker, a non-exerciser, or some combination thereof, are the direct result of a more central ailment of the mind. These deaths come from remaining enmeshed in the mind, trapped in lies. Escape from the trap of lies is in learning and improving through constant practice, just like learning to play golf or tennis, the ability to tell the truth. We are all the walking wounded. Most of us are still interested in clarity and the truth, but at the same time we're interested in making a case for how our childhood was worse than average and how we're better than anyone else. The conventional way to suffer through life is to build a case for ourselves. That's what you get taught to value in Catholic parochial school and law school, as well as all other schools, just not as efficiently as in those first two schools. But at the same time, we're all participants in a project to find out what being alive is. And when we lie or hide or avoid essential tactics in building a case, we don't discover anything new about life, and we don't help others to discover anything new either. Being interested in this common human project of discovery is an important part of the great conversation in which we humans have been engaged for several thousand years. For my own good, I want to hang out with people who want to find out what it would be like to live in such a way as to leave no unspoken words, no unfinished business. I want to be with people who are hungry for the truth, who want to spend time learning and sharing what they've learned rather than defending their images or reputations. This book is for that group of people that is growing larger every day, whose thirst for knowledge and willingness to share overrides their defense against embarrassment. I'm writing for people who want to grow beyond adolescence, the adolescence that currently passes for adulthood, for couples who are fed up with acting and blaming, for individuals interested in integrity or wholeness over moralism or fitting into roles. This book is an antidote to that conventional suffering. I hope it will piss you off and hurt you and inspire you and break your mind's hold on your spirit. Part 1. The Being. Please note, this book is divided into 4 parts. The sequence is intentional, and it will clarify what the book is about. Part 1, The Being. Part 2, The Mind. Part 3, The Liberation of the Being from its Mind. Part 4, Things Learned from the War between Being and Mind. If you get that distinction between being and mind, you are at the very heart of learning about radical honesty. The being notices. The mind thinks. Radical honesty is simply reporting what the being notices. Chapter 1. Moralism. As children grow up, they learn to abstract, generalize, and evaluate. They become emotionally attached to the summations and assessments they make in the course of learning how to make them. They learn to predict and control future events by remembering episodes that were painful and avoiding such episodes in the future. They remember episodes that were pleasant and try to recreate them. Life becomes a story, and the job is to remember the episodes, figure out the moral to the story, and use the instruction to live wisely and not get hurt or look like a fool. Growing up, children eventually get to the point where they can't stop living in their stories, and they continue like compulsive gamblers until they're finally exhausted and out of resources. This is called moralism, a disease from which we all suffer. It is incurable. It can only be managed and lived with. It's like herpes or diabetes. Most people believe that morals are good and children should be given moral instruction. Most people raise their children to live in the jail of moralism in which they themselves live. Most teachers consider their main function to be teaching children to behave and to do right and to be conscientious. Every adult has a whole raft of values they think should be taught to children. Few of these people are conscious of the way in which children are taught to value the values. Schools are central agents for transmission of the disease of moralism. The disease of moralism in adults is characterized by hysterical faith in the mind. We are all sick to death from moralism. The world of human beings may die from it. The passing on of learning from one generation to the next is not a bad design as an evolutionary development, but it seems to have triumphed. The idea-generating, self-perpetuating machine that has evolved seems to have worked. Human beings have taken over the world. The ability to act based on accumulated information and to pass great quantities of new information on is the primary survival characteristic of the strongest animal on Earth. But paradoxically, our survival mechanism has proven to be ultimately suicidal. It has allowed us to mass produce the consumables that provide us with the comfortable lifestyles that eventually kill us, to develop a technology for mass destruction for humans and the natural environment, and to rationalize the inexorable destruction of millions of lives relegated to fates of poverty, disease, and violence. Now we have to fix a few of our own glitches, perhaps in just a decade or two, or risk dying of our own evolution. Otherwise, human history may become just another little blip in time, at the end of which technical design ability surpassed psycho-emotional evolution, eventually extinguishing the species. Gregory Bateson says, in his calm, detached way, any species can get into an evolutionary cul-de-sac, and I suppose it is a mistake of sorts for that species to be party to its own extinction. The human species, as we all know, may extinguish itself any day now. We have arrived at the evolutionary crisis of moralism. Our chances of living beyond this crisis of consciousness are, of course, unknown. Probably the odds are in favor of extermination of either the species or the world that provides the context in which it lives, or both. Managing the disease of moralism. Adult moralists are always angry people. The more the moralist is confronted with sloppy old experience, the more hysterical he or she becomes. We all get hysterical, but some of us lighten up and come to our senses more often than others. Some of us operate from hysterical moralism most of the time. Famous political moralists like Joseph McCarthy, Spiro Agnew, J. Edgar Hoover, Hitler, and John Ashcroft are great prototypes of the disease in our culture. More lawyers have come to me for therapy than have members of any other profession, and it's not coincidence, since so much of their training is to learn to live by the rules. One important rule they try to live by is that the proper way to be angry is to have a fight using the rules. They often try to do this in their private lives, with complete lack of success. Perpetual arguing to convince others of the rightness of your case doesn't work worth a damn in personal relationships. And we all know it, but we can't seem to stop. A law school education emphasizes the idiocy already built in by the culture. Law school begins with memorizing torts, formally learning the cases from the past and the principles they represent, and it gets worse as it goes on. After 3 years of law school, a graduate usually takes the next step toward a law career, the bar exam, for which he or she has to take a cram course to memorize cases, principles, generalizations, and values. When the exam is administered, the potential member of the bar knows in advance that he or she must score in the upper 50% of those taking the exam or else fail. In the District of Columbia, if you are in the lower half of the group, but close to the cutoff, you may appeal your grade and request that your paper be regraded. However, they will not tell you the new grade until after the next bar exam has been administered. If you want to be sure you get to go to work as a lawyer, you'd better take the exam again, even though you may have passed already. This is to teach you a lesson. to do what you're told, no matter how ridiculous or unfair, if you want to be a lawyer. This continues year after year, with the only apparent purpose being to make sure you've really learned to kiss ass in the culturally approved way. Having passed the bar, if you're a high achiever, you then typically do a 3 to 7 year stint of working 70 to 80 hours a week for a law firm trying to make partner. After you've proven through many additional trials that you have learned to kiss ass in all circumstances, you may make partner. By the time you make partner, you're a workaholic, so you keep up the pace out of habit, but also because you don't know what the hell else to do in your life but work and count principles. This is the group from which we choose our political representatives. This is where judges come from. Though the learned disease of moralism is rampant in all professions, the middle-aged lawyer is the quintessential prototype for this disease. Lawyers are the best representatives of the way people are today.